This will sound very strange, but Joe Biden's speech, what some have called his speech from hell, and what others have called his Hitler speech, which he purposely delivered in front of the birthplace of democracy, Independence Hall in Philadelphia, in which he staged 2 Marines behind him in a backdrop reminiscent of a Hitler speech, in which he called for people to take action against what he said was the threat to democracy in America, Trump and Make America Great Again Republicans, is a most important prophecy from God that is communicating that the handwriting is on the wall for democracy, freedom, and the nation of America, and that this speech paralleled Emperor Palpatine's speech in the movie Star Wars. And it is a prophecy that is predicting that famous actor James Earl Jones, the voice of the Lion King and the voice of Darth Vader, and who starred in the most iconic baseball movie ever made, Field of Dreams, in which he delivered an iconic speech in which he asserted that America could be great again, is a prophecy from the righteous Christian God of the Bible that is predicting that James Earl Jones will die on May 17th, 2024. The famous actor James Earl Jones is King symbolism. He was the voice of the Lion King, played a dying king in Coming to America. James Earl Jones read the audio King James Bible and was the voice of Darth Vader, which is Antichrist King symbolism. Daniel chapter 5, verse 5, which is the verse that describes the king in his palace and the mysterious hand that writes a message on the wall. In English today, the handwriting is on the wall is an idiom that means that it is clear that something bad will probably happen soon. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction was made ahead of time, as does this timestamped email and forensic notes PDF. If you are skeptical, please email me and I will forward these to you. Although it has been known since the autumn of 2019 that the death of James Earl Jones will be a major prophetic sign, as we can see, this email here documents that this prediction that James Earl Jones will die has been known since at least November 2021. There is zero news of James Earl Jones's health as of the date that this video is posted. Furthermore, the reasoning that I am about to explain confirms that the supernatural is involved with these predictions. Also, I have known that the death of James Earl Jones would be a major prophetic sign from God since 2019. The famous actor James Earl Jones is King symbolism. He was the voice of the Lion King, played a dying king in Coming to America. James Earl Jones read the audio King James Bible and was the voice of Darth Vader, which is Antichrist King symbolism. In the Bible, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, was a prophetic foreshadow of the Antichrist king. Memphis, Tennessee is named after the ancient Egyptian city of Memphis. In God's prophetic signs, Memphis, Tennessee is King Pharaoh of Egypt symbolism. James Earl Jones is King symbolism, and he was born in Mississippi, right near Memphis, Tennessee. James Earl Jones was born right near where Elvis Presley was born. Elvis is the king of rock and roll. Elvis began his career in Memphis, Tennessee, with a record label named Sun Records, which hints at the upcoming Lion King Roar from the Sun and catastrophic solar flare coronal mass ejection hit from the sun. The king of rock and roll's famous Graceland estate, which is symbolism for a king's palace, is located in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis is also known for being the location that Martin Luther King was shot and killed. King was shot on the date 4/4, April 4th, which hints at the Antichrist king, the 44th president. In Bible prophecy, the number 666 symbolizes the Antichrist king. King was shot exactly 6 plus 6 plus 6 years after the UN Trustee Council officially recommended that Jerusalem be made an international city of the world ruled by the United Nations, which will be the big transgression against God as described in Bible prophecy. The defeat of the Antichrist on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem at the return of Lord Jesus Christ is described in Isaiah chapter 31. Isaiah chapter 31 begins with, "Woe to those who go down to Egypt," which is why right after becoming president, the Antichrist king, Barack Obama, went down to Cairo, Egypt, in order to deliver his famous speech to the Muslim world about how America is no longer a Christian nation. At the time, the Egyptians and the media called Obama the new King Tut of the world, which was symbolism for the Antichrist king of the world. Obama, the 44th president, is from Chicago and was an Illinois state senator in Springfield, Illinois, and the cities of Springfield and Chicago is connected to the city of Memphis, Tennessee, with the I-55 highway. The I-55 briefly becomes one with the I-44 in St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis is famous for its Gateway Arch and is nicknamed the Gateway to the West. In the Bible, God's judgment on a people symbolically begins at the gates. The I-55 and I-44 join together right exactly where the Gateway Arch is located. St. Louis was the biggest city in the U.S. that was within the path of totality of the Great American Eclipse, judgment warning, prophetic sign. The eclipse peaked right near St. Louis over a city named Cairo, Illinois, and in an area of the country nicknamed Little Egypt. The eclipse in 2024 will cross over the path of totality of the Great American Eclipse in 2017, and just like the 2017 eclipse, this 2024 eclipse will pass directly over Cairo, Illinois. The I-55 connects Cairo, Illinois to St. Louis, and it connects Cairo, Illinois to Memphis, Tennessee. The Great American Eclipse, judgment warning prophetic sign that peaked over Cairo, Illinois, occurred exactly 3,000 days after Barack Obama went down to Cairo, Egypt, to deliver his famous speech. In the Bible, it was, quote, about 3,000 souls, unquote, that perished in judgment from God after their rebellion at Mount Sinai, and it was, quote, about 3,000 souls, unquote, that came to saving faith after Peter's first sermon on the first day of the church age. The Antichrist will persecute God's people. The Great American Eclipse judgment warning prophetic sign that went over St. Louis was in turn exactly 600 plus 600 plus 600 days before the extremely prophetic, historic, and destructive flooding in St. Louis, which hints at the number 666, which is Antichrist symbolism, and hints at the age of Noah, which was 600 at the time of the flood judgment. The flooding in St. Louis required 70 rescues by firefighters, and this flooding was known for having caused the closure of a section of the I-70 highway. The I-70 highway runs parallel to the path of totality of the Great American Eclipse, and the path of totality of the eclipse was 70 miles wide. In the account of Noah's flood in the Bible, there are three sets of 7. As well, when the Hebrews took the Promised Land, they marched around the walls of security of the ancient city of Jericho once per day for 7 days, And then on the seventh day, they marched around 7 times, while 7 priests blew 7 trumpets. This was a prophetic 3 sets of 7, and then the walls of security collapsed in God's judgment. This is why we have this 3 sets of 7 in this prophetic flood sign in St. Louis. And this prophetic flood in St. Louis was 37 days before Joe Biden's speech on September 1st. This 37 days connection hints at 3 sets of 7. In fact, the segment of the I-70 highway that was shut down was located where Highway 370 intersects the I-70, which further confirms the addition of 37 days. Also, 37 days is the equivalent of 888 hours. And in gematria, which if you don't know what that is, Roman, Greek, and Hebrew letters are also numbers, and as such, names and words can be converted into a numeric value. And the name Jesus in Greek, in the Greek New Testament, is the equivalent of 888, because Greek letters are also numbers. And so again, 37 days is the equivalent of 888 hours, which hints at Jesus. And this will become more relevant as I explain this trail further in a few minutes, because it all leads to the return of Lord Jesus Christ. As well, Biden's Hitler speech was exactly 37 years after the discovery of the Titanic at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean on September 1st, 1985, and the sinking of the Titanic is also flood symbolism. 37 years is also exactly 444 months, and the 44th president is the Antichrist, and the discovery of the Titanic is a major prophetic sign from God. It was a warning of judgment from God. The sinking of the Titanic on its maiden voyage, the unsinkable ship, was symbolic of man's hubris. And the discovery of the Titanic, this prophetic sign of its discovery, on 9/1 and 85, was exactly 123 years after the Carrington event, which was the solar flare that hit Earth, the coronal mass ejection that caused the telegraph wires to burn up. And had the event occurred in our time with our modern infrastructure, it would have been a complete disaster. But these things are cyclical, and the astronomers say we are overdue, or time is coming for another Carrington event, which is the case. It's going to happen, which is what God is pointing to. And incidentally, the Carrington event is a solar flare is symbolic of fire. And Peter said that the next judgment would be by fire and not water, which is a contrast with the flood and the flood judgment in the Bible. And that's symbolized with the Titanic. Well, anyway, the 123 years connection between the Carrington event and the discovery of the Titanic is profound and prophetic, because the 123 number is the 42nd prime number. And in the Bible, a period of time, which is what this is, of 42 months is symbolic of the period of the Antichrist and the end times. And so we have that 42 connection to the discovery of the Titanic, followed by the 444 months, which hints at the 44th president, who is the Antichrist, which is symbolized again by the number 42 in the Bible. The Antichrist is from Chicago, and he is the 44th president. And the I-55 highway connects Chicago to St. Louis. The flooding caused the section of the highway where the I-44 and I-55 join together to become one right at the Gateway Arch. And during the flooding, the National Park Service officially announced the closure of the Gateway Arch, which was symbolism for the closure of God's relationship with America. In the account of Noah's flood, the flood waters increased for 40 days. The flooding at the gateway to the West Arch occurred exactly 40 days after the Golden State Warriors won the NBA basketball championship. The Golden State Warriors wear uniforms that have the Golden Gate Bridge on it. The Golden Gate Bridge is nicknamed the Gateway to America. The Gateway to America is 90 feet wide and 1.7 miles long, which hints at the president that was president from 2009 until 2017. Their team uniforms also have a lightning bolt on the side of their shirt. Obama is the basketball president, and lightning is Antichrist symbolism. Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. And in Hebrew, Barak is the word for lightning. Bama is the word that means high place, which in the Bible is a metaphor for heaven, as it is written that Lucifer fell from the high place, a metaphor for heaven. And in Aramaic, the language Jesus would have spoken, the word for from is O. Hence, Barack Obama is lightning from heaven. The man God used in this Golden State Warriors NBA championship is Stephen Curry, and there was a prophetic sign in which Stephen Curry fell on the basketball court. He was wearing this uniform with a lightning bolt, and this was symbolism for Satan falling like lightning from heaven. Stephen Curry didn't just fall down, he was knocked down, and it was a controversial foul that was not called, and he was knocked down right after he scored a three-pointer, which made the score at the time 73-73, which hints at 3 sets of 7. In that prophetic game, Stephen Curry scored 7 3-pointers, which was another 3 sets of 7. In the first game of this NBA Finals, Stephen Curry scored 21 points in the first quarter, which made this 3 sets of 7. The Golden State Warriors won the series with a game in which they went on a 21-0 point run, which was a 3 sets of 7. It was their 7th championship win for Golden State. Player 30 was the MVP, Stephen Curry, who is the 3-point king. And in the Bible, the number 30 is symbolic of a king. And this MVP for player 30 in the 7th championship for Golden State was a 3 sets of 7. Golden State, which hints at the Golden Gate Bridge, the gateway to the west, won the series 40 days, which is Noah's flood symbolism, to the day that the Gateway Arch was flooded in St. Louis, in a prophetic sign in which there was 3 sets of 7. And again, the flooding at the Gateway Arch was 37 days, which hints at 3 sets of 7, to the day that Joe Biden delivered his prophetic Hitler speech in front of Independence Hall in Philadelphia. The I-55 that connects the home city of the Antichrist King, Chicago, to Memphis, Tennessee, the home of the King of Rock and Roll's Graceland estate, which is symbolism for a king's palace, is symbolism for the prophet Daniel in the Bible, chapter 5, verse 5, which is the verse that describes the king in his palace and the mysterious hand that writes a message on the wall. In English today, the handwriting is on the wall is an idiom that means that it is clear that something bad will probably happen soon. The prophet Daniel interpreted the message from God for the king and said that the king was being judged by God for not honoring God. The king died that same night that King Cyrus from Persia captured the city of Babylon. In the Bible, Babylon is symbolism for the Antichrist king. As described in the 45th chapter, King Cyrus was used by God to liberate the Jews and restore Israel. Likewise, God also used the 45th president in a manner that symbolically paralleled King Cyrus, who is described in Isaiah chapter 45. And by the way, the reason why God designed President Trump's hair the way it is because it hints at the iconic headwear that King Cyrus wore. God uses 36 months connections as they symbolize the number 666, which is Antichrist symbolism. 36 is 6 times 6, and also 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And the 36th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 36th row is 666. And 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way up to 36 equals 666. The date September 1st, 2022 was predicted ahead of time to be a date of a prophetic event because it was exactly 36 months after the prophetic sign that was the flash flood that killed 7 people in Hell's Gate Canyon National Park in the southwest region of Kenya that Barack Obama was born. Joe Biden's speech from hell was exactly 36 months after this flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon National Park. Hell's Gate Canyon is the location that inspired the movie The Lion King. James Earl Jones was the voice of the Lion King, and he starred in the most iconic baseball movie ever made, Field of Dreams. When Barack Obama first presented his birth certificate forgery at the White House press correspondents' dinner, he cloaked the biggest lie in history in comedy when he played a clip of The Lion King and joked that it was the scene of his birth, which in fact was prophetic because the truth is Barack Obama was born right near the location, Hell's Gate Canyon, that inspired the movie The Lion King. September 1st, 2019 was also the day of the Washington Nationals' Simba Cam prophetic sign, which was a Lion King movie prophetic sign that will be explained later. However, it was also a baseball prophetic sign. In the Bible, 30 years is symbolism for a king. David and Joseph were made kings at 30 years old. This baseball Simba Cam sign, which was a king sign, a Lion King sign, on the day of the flash flood sign in Hell's Gate Canyon, the location that inspired the movie The Lion King, occurred exactly 30 years after the 7th Commissioner of Baseball died. The 7th Commissioner of Baseball died exactly 5 months after he became the 7th Commissioner of Baseball. He died while in office, and in the account of Noah's flood, the flood judgment lasted for exactly 5 months. And James Earl Jones's character, the Lion King, died in a stampede of wildebeests, which is symbolism for a flood. James Earl Jones was born exactly 7 years and 77 days before the birth of the 7th Commissioner of Baseball. James Earl Jones read the 7th Commissioner of Baseball's poem, which is about how baseball is a homecoming, which was symbolism for the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ, right at the beginning of the broadcast of Game 3 of the 1989 World Series. 4 minutes later, the extremely prophetic 1989 World Series earthquake judgment warning sign occurred live on television. As explained in other videos, God is using all of this to point to the first commissioner of baseball that was given during a time of crisis complete unchecked power over every person in baseball. The first commissioner of baseball is Antichrist symbolism. James Earl Jones starred in the most iconic baseball movie ever made, in which he delivered a speech about how America could be great again. This movie was about the 1919 White Sox and the Black Sox World Series scandal, which was the crisis that brought the first commissioner of baseball to power. In God's signs, pitchers on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount. The Chicago White Sox suffered a supposed sports curse and didn't win a World Series until 2005, and Barack Obama, who is from Chicago, after having become a U.S. Senator, in 2005 threw out the first pitch of a prophetic baseball game that communicated that the defeat of the Antichrist on the Temple Mount at the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ would be exactly 19 years after this game on the Day of Atonement on October 12, 2024, which is the reason for the 1919 Black Sox World Series scandal, and this game in which Obama threw out the first pitch was exactly 190, which hints at the number 19, months before the prophetic Field of Dreams baseball game was played in the same cornfield in Iowa in which James Earl Jones delivered his "America Could Be Great Again" speech. God uses many, many baseball prophetic signs because, as James Earl Jones said in the movie Field of Dreams, American history is intertwined with baseball. James Earl Jones's "America Could Be Great Again" speech in the movie Field of Dreams is symbolism for the Make America Great Again slogan. The slogan, Make America Great Again, is symbolism for God's warning to America that it return to God or else judgment destruction. In archaic English, the word Trump means trumpet or the sounding of a trumpet. President Trump and Trumpers, MAGA Republicans, symbolize the Hebrews that blew trumpets outside of the walls of security of the ancient city of Jericho before the walls collapsed in judgment from God. Joe Biden's speech was about vilifying the MAGA Republicans as the threat to democracy and America. In the background was a brick wall, the brick wall of Independence Hall in Philadelphia, the birthplace of democracy. Biden's speech in front of this wall was a parallel with the book of Joshua and the walls of Jericho that collapsed in God's judgment, and Biden's speech was symbolism for America's walls of security collapsing in God's judgment. In the backdrop behind Biden was a lampstand that was shining its light on the white gloves of one of the two Marines standing guard. The Marine's hands were folded, showing one of his hands to the audience. The white glove of his hand stood out against the dark backdrop of the wall behind the Marine. In the book of Daniel, chapter 5, verse 5, it is a lampstand that lights up the hand that is writing on the wall. Biden's speech was a handwriting on the wall Antichrist speech that God used to communicate that the handwriting is on the wall for democracy in America. It was a handwriting on the wall sign that communicated the coming persecution of God's people from the Antichrist. This hinted at Daniel chapter 5, verse 5, and this is why this speech occurred exactly 5 + 5 + 5 months after the Elvis sign that was stolen from the wall. On the front entrance to Elvis's birthplace museum in Tupelo, Mississippi, the sign that was Elvis's signature was stolen. Elvis's signature was his handwriting. It was a literal handwriting on the wall prophetic sign. And again, Elvis's Graceland estate, which is symbolism for a king's palace in Memphis, Tennessee, which is Antichrist king symbolism, is connected to Chicago, the home of the Antichrist, with the I-55 highway. The king of rock and roll, Elvis, was born right near where the voice of the Lion King, James Earl Jones, was born. On the same day of the news of the Elvis sign that was stolen from the brick wall was the day of the national news story about a 3-year-old girl's wish for a Lion King death cake. She wanted a cake that depicted the death of Mufasa, so that other people would be sad and wouldn't want to eat the cake, and she could have it all to herself. Biden's speech that vilified people that want to make America great again, which was a handwriting on the wall sign that pointed to Daniel chapter 5, verse 5, occurred exactly 55 weeks after the prophetic Field of Dreams baseball game was played in the same cornfield in Iowa that James Earl Jones delivered his America Could Be Great Again speech. Again, Biden's speech from hell was exactly 36 months after the deadly flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon National Park, the location that inspired the movie The Lion King. Again, the number 36 is symbolic of the number 666, which is the number of the Antichrist. Joe Biden, who is mentally unfit to be president, was installed as the president in order that he could be replaced by his old pal, Barack Obama, the Antichrist. The flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon, the location that inspired the movie The Lion King, right near where the 44th president was born, was exactly 44 days after the release of the new computer-animated Lion King movie. The flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon, the location that inspired the movie The Lion King, was also exactly 44 weeks after the crash of the Lion Air passenger plane into the ocean right near the coast of Indonesia, the country that the 44th president grew up in for 4 years. And the 44th president will become the president again after it is predicted that Vice President Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on February 3rd, 2024. The flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon was exactly 36 months before Joe Biden's speech from hell. And if I didn't mention earlier, the number 36 in God's signs is symbolism for 666, the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. 36 hints at 3 sixes. It is also 6 times 6. And the 36th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 36th row is 666. And 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way up to 36 equals 666. All right, now to further emphasize the flooding symbolism connections to Joe Biden's speech from hell, we have the flash flooding in Hell's Gate Canyon connection, and we have the connection of 444 months to the discovery of the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean, which is flood symbolism. And again, the flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon was exactly 44 weeks after the crash of the Lion Air plane into the ocean. And again, we had to Joe Biden's speech the connection from the flooding in St. Louis, with the 37 days from the 3 sets of 7 symbolism, with the flooding in St. Louis near the I-55 highway. Okay, and again, now I'm going to tie it all together here. The Joe Biden speech on 9/1/2022 was exactly 55 weeks, which hints at the I-55, which is what God is using to point to, for one thing, Little Egypt and Graceland Estate, which is near where James Earl Jones was born. Jones is king symbolism. He was born right near where the king of rock and roll was born, who lived right near there in his king's palace, his Graceland Estate. And again, Joe Biden's speech from hell on September 1st, 2022 was a handwriting on the wall sign, which pointed to the book of Daniel, chapter 5, verse 5. This is why we have this 55 weeks connection back from September 1st, 2022. All right, so we have the connection of 55 weeks back to the Field of Dreams game, and that is the location where James Earl Jones delivered his iconic speech regarding how America could be great again, which is ultimately what God is pointing to. And he is contrasting this with Joe Biden's speech, his speech from hell, which is antithetical to God and James Earl Jones's speech about how America could be great again. Because the spiritual truth behind today's Democrat Party and the modern left is Satan. It's evil. Joe Biden's speech was pure evil, and it is all leading to a genocide. It is leading to the persecution of God's people very soon. So we have the 55 weeks connection, and as I'm demonstrating here, it leads back to James Earl Jones. Now, the reason for this is because the movie Field of Dreams, in which the speech is made, James Earl Jones's speech, that movie is about the 1919 Chicago Black Sox. And this is the reason for the connection of 55 weeks to Joe Biden's speech on the date 9/1, which hints at 19. And that's why from Joe Biden's speech, it is exactly 19 months to the predicted solar flare coronal mass ejection from the sun that will hit Earth and knock out the power grid for North America, leading to a moment of crisis in which the Antichrist will assume complete power, just like the first commissioner of baseball was given unchecked power over every person in baseball after the 1919 Chicago Black Sox World Series scandal. That is the reason for how James Earl Jones connects to all of this, because God is using as a metaphor, as explained in other videos, he is using as a metaphor for the coming solar flare of a lion's roar. Jesus in Bible prophecy is said to descend from the tribe of Judah, which is symbolized by a lion, hence why I mentioned earlier that 37 days equals 888 hours, which hints at Jesus. But the coming solar flare is to be symbolized by a lion, and furthermore, the flash flood, Hell's Gate Canyon flash flood sign, which was 44 weeks after the Lion airplane crash, and 44 days after the release of the new Lion King movie, in which James Earl Jones reprised his role as the king, the Lion King. Well, that date was also exactly 4 times 40 years after the Carrington event, which was the big solar flare that hit Earth. And had we had the modern infrastructure that we have today, it would have been a complete catastrophe. And astronomers believe that these things are cyclical and it could happen again, and it will happen again, is what I'm saying. Exactly 19 years after this 9/1 date in 2022, which was 36 months after 9/1 in 2019, which, by the way, is 1919, as in the 1919 Black Sox. But that date in turn was exactly 4 times 40 years, which hints at the 44th president, after the Carrington event. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is play a clip that explains more the relevance of the 1919 Chicago Black Sox and their connection to the Field of Dreams game on August 12th, 2021, which was exactly 55 weeks to Joe Biden's speech from hell, which pointed to Daniel chapter 5, verse 5, the handwriting on the wall. Okay, I forgot to mention that. That's why that 55 weeks is relevant. It's not only the I-55, which hints at James Earl Jones, but it's also, and James Earl Jones is king symbolism, and Daniel 5:5 is about a king. Okay? And the handwriting on the wall, for America. So that's why the 55 weeks. So this is astounding, okay? But the 55 weeks connects to the 1919 Black Sox because of the Field of Dreams game, which was because of the Field of Dreams movie, which contains the James Earl Jones speech. Okay, so that's you see what I'm saying? That's an extremely profound connection. And then in turn, from the 9/1/2022 date, the Joe Biden speech, it is a simple 19 months to the coming solar flare, which is a lion's roar. And that's why James Earl Jones was the voice of the Lion King. All right, now the lion's roar that's predicted to be on April 1st, 2024, will be 44 days after it is predicted that James Earl Jones will die on February 17th. And of course, by now you realize how all of the other 44s in these connections that I just explained confirm that 44 days. Okay, so that's how it all connects to the death of James Earl Jones prediction. Now, what I'm going to do is play a very profound clip explaining more regarding the connection between the 1919 Chicago Black Sox and the Field of Dreams game, which in turn, I'll just say it one more time, connects with 55 weeks to the Daniel 5-5 sign, the Joe Biden speech, on the date 9/1, which hints at 19, because in the rest of the world outside of the US, the date 9/1 is written as 1/9, which is in turn exactly 19 months to the fire from the sun, which is contrasted with the flood symbolism that I've been explaining in these signs and connections, because Peter said that the upcoming judgment would be symbolized by fire instead of water, as in Noah's flood. Okay, so that's the contrast that God's using there. And so again, the Joe Biden speech is 19 months after the date 9/1 to April 1st, 2024, and the power going out, which by the way is why the power went out in the broadcast booth of at the Game 3 of the 1989 World Series, right after James Earl Jones read the poem that the 7th Commissioner of Baseball wrote. That's the reason for the power outage in that sign. And again, James Earl Jones was born 7 months and 77 days before the 7th Commissioner was born. And the 7th Commissioner of Baseball was born 726 days, which hints at the rapture, because the word rapture in the Greek concordance is the 726th word in the concordance. 726 days after astronomers at an international astronomy convention observed what they called highly unusual sunspot activity on the surface of the sun that formed into the quote-unquote quite perfect crucifix on the surface of the sun. Because it all ties back through James Earl Jones and the reading of the poem and the power outage and the broadcast booth and on and on. Field of Dreams, most iconic baseball. That's why James Earl Jones read the poem, the baseball poem. And okay, so you get the point here. Now I'm just going to play that clip and watch the other videos to get more details on what I'm talking about, which I've tried my best to explain very briefly here, but there's obviously much more to what I'm talking about. If it all was confusing, it shouldn't really be. The clip here that I'm about to play will help. By the way, this clip that you're about to watch that's a few minutes long is from a longer video that is a very important, profound video, the King Tut prophecy video. Make sure you watch that video. All right, we have an update here. I was just talking about this connection from the Carrington event, the solar flare in 1859 on September 1st, and how it was 4 times 40 years exactly to the speech from hell with Joe Biden on the date 9/1 in 2022. Correction, the Carrington event was exactly 4 times 40 years to the Hell's Gate Canyon flash flood on September 1st, 2019, which was a prophetic 36 months before Joe Biden's speech on September 1st, 2022. And I was talking about how that was the Daniel chapter 5, verse 5, handwriting on the wall sign, which was exactly 55 weeks after the prophetic Field of Dreams game and the movie Field of Dreams, starred James Earl Jones, who delivered an iconic speech in which he said America could be great again. All right. Now, this 55 weeks, or the number 55, is the 19th semi-prime number, which means that the number can only be divided by two other prime numbers. God uses prime and semi-prime numbers. The number 19 symbolizes God's perfect judgment, because the number 9 is the most important number in God's big picture of signs. As from the Bible, it symbolizes God's judgment. The number 10 symbolizes God's perfect order, and the number 19 symbolizes God's perfect judgment. So 55 is important because it symbolizes God's perfect judgment. This is why the I-55 connects Chicago, the home of the Antichrist, to the area of the country nicknamed Little Egypt that includes Memphis, which is of course named after Memphis, Egypt. Anyway, and that's why James Earl Jones was born near there, and on and on. Okay, so we have again the 55 weeks connection, which again is the 19th prime number, and the movie Field of Dreams is about the 1919 Chicago Black Sox scandal, which, as I'm about to explain further, gave rise to a prophetic foreshadow, a symbol, if you will, of the Antichrist, the first commissioner of baseball, who was given unchecked power in a moment of crisis, the 1919 World Series Chicago Black Sox crisis. Just like how the Antichrist will be given unchecked power over every American after the crisis begins with the solar flare. Now, as I was saying, Joe Biden's speech on the date 9/1, which hints at 19, is exactly 19 months to April 1st, 2024. And I was predicting that that would be the date because God was pointing to that date in regards to the solar flare. But the thing is, as you know by now, the way in which God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel, is that the full intended meaning of God's prophetic signs cannot be properly understood without their connections and context with the other prophetic signs, and they engender trails of signs. And so April 1st was another step. And we received the sign that confirmed the analysis 100%, the relevant sign, which was the 7 deaths. Before I continue, again, we are talking about the 7th commissioner of baseball, and James Earl Jones being born 7 years and 77 days before the birth of the 7th commissioner of baseball, and James Earl Jones reading his poem right before the broadcast booth power went out in the 1989 World Series earthquake, just 3 to 4 minutes after James Earl Jones read the 7th commissioner of baseball's poem. And James Earl Jones's birth 7 years and 77 days before the birth of the 7th commissioner of baseball is symbolic of 3 sets of 7, which God uses frequently in his signs because from the Bible it symbolizes his judgment, because the Israelites enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7 before the walls of security of ancient Jericho collapsed due to an earthquake. Archaeology proves that the walls of Jericho collapsed due to an earthquake. And so this 3 sets of 7 involving James Earl Jones and the 7th commissioner of baseball also involves an earthquake, because after James Earl Jones read the poem of the 7th commissioner was the extremely arguably the most prophetic earthquake in all of history. All right, and on and on. So this is the reason for the 7 deaths. The 7 deaths were what? The 7 deaths were the 7 workers for the World Central Kitchen Convoy Aid Organization in Gaza. That's prophetic in many ways other than just what I'm explaining here. This World Central Kitchen is the exact sign that's so amazing and relevant, because what is predicted to happen is that as a result of the solar flare, there will be food shortages and food rationing. And the mark of the Antichrist will be enforced through rationing the food to only those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist. Okay, that's what is going on here. This result from the solar flare was known a long time ago, and that's why we received the prophetic sign that fit completely the analysis that God was pointing to April 1st, 19 months after this Biden speech from hell. And again, the 19 is so relevant because of the 1919 Chicago Black Sox, which led to the first commissioner of baseball again, which is why the seventh commissioner of baseball is all tied into this because of, and through James Earl Jones, etc. And so this is your update here. Now this diagram that I'm going to be showing, let me just show the diagram. It's going to be talking about February 17th. That was a step in the trail of signs. We received the irrelevant solar flare sign on that date. All right, here's the April 1st date. Now you know that this was a step in the trail. You know what happened here. This was the 7 deaths in the World Central Kitchen. Okay, so you get the idea here. The rest of this video, this clip here I'm going to be playing is so amazing. Make sure you watch it all. All right, one thing to add here before we get into that clip that I just mentioned I would be playing, explaining this truly profound diagram. It has now come to light because, of course, it's a big picture of signs, and like any puzzle, the image becomes clearer with more pieces. And so God has developed the big picture of signs further since this video was recorded, at least what I just mentioned was recorded. In fact, this video has been in production since the summer of 2022. Okay, so anyway, it is now known or believed that James Earl Jones will die on May 17th, 2024. And the solar flare is predicted to be 88 days later on August 13th. James Earl Jones reprised his role as the voice of the Lion King in the new live-action The Lion King movie released in 2019 at the age of 88. And that's because the name Jesus in Greek is equal to 888 in Greek gematria. This is explained more in other videos. I just wanted to get that out of the way here too, but I also wanted to get to here what is something truly amazing, which will only be in this video, I think, so far anyway, is that September 1st, 2019, this very important date with the Hell's Gate Canyon flash flood, which connects to Joe Biden's speech from hell, as has been explained. This Hell's Gate Canyon flash flood that killed 7 people in the location that inspired the movie The Lion King, on the day that the Pope was 7 minutes late for Mass due to a power outage, which is, of course, hinting at the coming power outage that will be caused by the lion's roar, voice of the Lion King, on the surface of the sun. This September 1st, 2019, which, by the way, was the 30th anniversary of the death of the 7th commissioner of baseball, and James Earl Jones starred in the most iconic movie ever made about baseball and the 1919 Chicago Black Sox, and the date 9/1 in 2019 hints at 19 and 19 Chicago Black Sox. It also hints at 9/11, and that's why on this day, one of the sports national news, on this day, there was a sports news story that was a national sports news story regarding the baseball team, as in baseball, from Washington, D.C., the Washington Nationals, and how, as a joke, for amusement, they held up 2 of their players for the Simba cam. Simba is the son of the Lion King in the movie The Lion King, and the iconic scene is of him, the baby Simba, being lifted up for everyone to see. And that's what happens in baseball stadiums. Fans will lift up their baby or their pet for the Simba cam. Well, for a joke, the Washington Nationals baseball team held up 2 of its players. This was in, by the way, their prophetic year in which they won the World Series after their exact 50th year as a franchise. And that's very prophetic from the Bible, 50 years. And that's another story, the Washington Nationals 2019 team. But anyway, they held up 2 of their players, and the 2 players that they held up were number 2 and 22. And George Washington, as in the Washington Nationals, was born on the date 2/22. And through the 9/11 events, God pointed to George Washington, which was why CVD Disease Day, March 11th, 2020, was exactly 222 months after 9/11. I predicted CVD disease in October of 2019. I said that something very big and bad and world-changing would happen on March 11th, 2020, and I didn't say that about any other date, including right up until the date. And right up until the date, I didn't even know what it would be, and then that was the day that the World Health Organization officially declared that the CVD disease was a beginning with a pan and ending with a demic, and Trump delivered his Oval Office speech that ended precisely at 9:11 p.m. Well, the reason why I knew that date in advance is because it was exactly 222 months after 9/11, and through the 9/11 events, God pointed to George Washington, who was born on the date 222. Okay, so anyway, and that again, this September 1st, 2019 date, the date of the Hell's Gate Canyon National Park flood that killed 7 people. The location that inspired the movie The Lion King, the 30th anniversary of the death of the 7th Commissioner of Baseball. And by the way, 30 years in the Bible symbolizes a king. That's why it was prophetic that it was the 30th anniversary of the death of Bartlett Giamatti, the 7th Commissioner of Baseball. And that's why, by the way, James Earl Jones read his poem right after he died at the beginning of the broadcast of the World Series game. Is because the 7th Commissioner had just died while he was in office. Well, okay, so I've given you a lot now. I wanted to give you the background on this September 1st, 2019 date, just to stress more the significance of it. Oh, and by the way, again, it was exactly 44 weeks after the plane crash of the Lion Air Airlines plane crash, which hinted at the Lion King and how the Antichrist king will come to power through a plane crash from the death of Kamala Harris while she's in office, speaking of while Bartlett Giamatti was in office. And by the way, he was in office for exactly 5 months. And 5 months after Kamala Harris took the office, she was visiting the president of Guatemala, whose name is Giamatti, the same name as the 7th Commissioner. That was amazing too. Well, okay, so September 1st, 2019. All right, so again, it was 4 times 40 years after the Carrington event, and again on September 1st, 2019, we didn't only have the flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon, but we also had the power outage that caused the Pope to be 7 minutes late, because the Pope is the first of the 2 antichrists. Barack Obama, the 44th president, is the second of the 2, and by the way, that's the reason for the exact 44 weeks to the Lion Air crash, because Barack Obama was, of course, born in the Kenyan savannah, where they have lion safari tours. And that's where, of course, the movie The Lion King was inspired, the Hell's Gate Canyon National Park in southwest Kenya, the same region of Kenya in which Barack Obama was born, the 44th president. Okay, so September 1st, 2019 was exactly 4 times 40 years, and that's, of course, also hinting at the 44th president after the Carrington event. And what God is communicating here is that the lion's roar, which will be on the surface of the sun, and that's this metaphor that God is using, and that's why James Earl Jones, because he's the voice of the Lion King, it's a metaphor God is using for this coming solar flare, which will be, by the way, 44 plus 44 days after the death of James Earl Jones, which is, again, also 44 and hinting at the 44th president. And again, well, okay, so September 1st, 2019 was 4 times 40 years after the Carrington event, and God is communicating that this coming solar flare, like the Carrington event, will knock out the power, right? What I also wanted to add here is that the flash flood on September 1st, 2019, and the Washington Nationals baseball sign and the sign in the Vatican, this date is or was also exactly 2 times 17 years after the discovery of the Titanic. The Titanic is symbolic of America because it is symbolic of the pilgrims that crossed the Atlantic in the boat, the Mayflower, That's what God is pointing to with the Titanic. There were 101 passengers on the Mayflower, and that's why 101 years exactly after the Titanic sank was the Boston bombing, because of course the Pilgrims founded New England and the Boston colony. There were 101 passengers on the Mayflower, and that's why the recently published new 3D images of the Titanic in May of 2023 include an image of the propeller of the Titanic, which has on it a very big serial number of 101. Just more confirmation that the Titanic is symbolic of the Mayflower and the founding of America. The Titanic sank because it was deemed unsinkable, and that was hubris of man, and that's why the sinking of the Titanic is symbolic of judgment of man. Well, the reason why the Titanic sank exactly 2 times 17 years before September 1st, 2019, which as I'm explaining connects to the day of the death of James Earl Jones. Okay, so the reason for the 2 times 17 months, there's a few reasons. One, it symbolizes 9/11, because the two planes struck the two towers 17 minutes apart. And again, this 2 times 17 years connects to this date, September 1st, 2019, which hints at 9/11. Not only does the date hint at 9/11, but we had the sign that also hinted at 9/11, as I just explained, with player number 2 and 22 being held up, which hinted at George Washington, and it was through the 9/11 events that God pointed to George Washington. Because upon his inauguration as the first president at the founding of the nation, he walked down Wall Street from Federal Hall into Trinity Chapel, where he consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its divine protection and blessings, which it did temporarily on 9/11. And Trinity Chapel today is known as the Miracle Chapel because it was the only building to have not been damaged at ground zero. It survived the falling debris without even a broken window. And that's because God was pointing to the sycamore trees that were uprooted in the judgment warning for ancient Israel in Isaiah chapter 9:11, and the Miracle Chapel was saved by the 70-year-old sycamore tree which was uprooted, and today there's a huge bronze statue 20 feet high of this of the roots of the tree in front of the Miracle Chapel. Well, anyway, God, through the 9/11 events, pointed to the only building that wasn't damaged and survived without even a broken window, because George Washington was in that chapel consecrating the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its divine protection and blessings, which is why exactly 222 months after 9/11 was the end of Trump's Oval Office speech about the CVD disease that ended precisely at 9:11 p.m. Okay, so that's why, one reason why the 2 times 17 months here to this date that symbolizes 9/11, but also 2 times 17 hints at the date 217, which in the account of the flood in the book of Genesis was the day on which the flood began. And this connects to a flood, the flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon. You see how all this was worth it, me going into all this background for this, okay? So that's amazing. And again, Peter said that the coming judgment would be symbolized by fire instead of water, and that's why the judgment will be fire from the sun. And that's why we have this 2 times 17 years exactly from the Titanic, which is symbolic of judgment on America, as I just explained, to September 1st, 2019, okay, and the flood, but also it connects to the Joe Biden speech, and that is just how huge and important the Joe Biden hell speech is. But also there's this. This is amazing. H188 in Strong's Hebrew Concordance is the word woe ! And it is used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God, which is why God uses this number frequently in his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which, by the way, is only being explained on this channel. So 188 symbolizes this. Well, from this September 1st, 2019 date, which again connects to all of these things, including the Carrington event and the Titanic, these judgment warning signs. September 1st, 2019 is exactly 1,808 days, which hints at 188 because you take the zero out. That's how God's signs works. The zero is canceled out. So 1,808 days is symbolic of 188. September 1st, 2019 is exactly 1,808 days before the predicted solar flare, fire from the sun, lion's roar, that will knock out the power grid in America. On August 13th, 2024, the 9th of Av in the Hebrew calendar, and also the date of the resurrection rapture event, which is why James Earl Jones is king symbolism. And by the way, his death will be 88 days before this date. In other words, his death will be, come to think of it, well, no, never mind. So there you have it. You have the Titanic and the Carrington event connecting through September 1st, 2019, this extremely important date. And then in turn, it is 1,808 days, which hints at whoa, exclamation mark, to the big whoa, exclamation mark event. I can't stress how profound that is. All right, one thing to add here is that the 84 million workers sign, as I explained, was a date that was known ahead of time because it was 84 days after the Field of Dreams prophetic sign on August 12th, 2021. That was so long ago that I even sort of forget exactly how I came to learn about the 84 days connection in the first place. I'm sure, though, it was probably because it was realized for other reasons that November 4th would be important. And then 84 being the connection being important as well, because of course it hints at Barack Obama, his birth date, August 4th. All right. And Obama is the Antichrist, who will enforce the mark of the Antichrist, which is the reason for the 84 million workers mandate on November 4th. Everything that I've just explained about November 4th, it being the anniversary of Obama's election, etc. All right, well, the Field of Dreams baseball game, which was the first regular season Major League Baseball game played in Iowa, in the cornfield, next to the cornfield in which the movie Field of Dreams was filmed, the most iconic baseball movie ever made, starring James Earl Jones, and in which he delivers an iconic speech in which he talks about how America could be great again. That date, August 12th, 2021, was exactly 190 months after October 12th, 2005, which was a prophetic baseball game in which Barack Obama threw out the first pitch. And in God's signs, pitchers on the pitching mound are symbolic of the Antichrist on the Temple Mount. Now, there are a lot of things about this prophetic game, which is explained in other videos. But it was a Chicago White Sox playoff game. At the time, Barack Obama was the senator from Illinois. He had just become the senator, in fact. And this was the year that the Chicago White Sox broke their sports curse that had dated back to the 1919 World Series, which is known as the Black Sox scandal, which the movie Field of Dreams is about. The movie Field of Dreams is about the 1919 Black Sox, and hence why in the Field of Dreams game on August 12th, 2021, one of the two teams was the Chicago White Sox. All right, now, as I mentioned, the Field of Dreams game in 2021 was exactly 190 months after this prophetic baseball game on October 12th, 2005, in the year that the White Sox broke their sports curse dating back to the 1919 World Series. In other words, the 190 months connection hints at the number 19. This prophetic baseball game on October 12th, 2005 is exactly 19 years before the Day of Atonement in the Hebrew calendar on October 12th, 2024, which will be the day of the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ, when he will defeat the Antichrist on the Temple Mount. And that's why exactly 19 years before this was the day that the Antichrist was on the pitching mound, because pitchers on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount and his defeat on the Temple Mount. All right. There's more, in fact, confirmation for all of this as well. The game-winning hit was hit by player number 24 that ended the most controversial baseball playoff game in history, in which the Angels should have won. The pitcher for the Angels, number 45, as in the 45th president, he was shoplifted of his win by the umpire with the horrendous mistaken call. Okay. Well, anyway, so God demonstrated this prophetic sign in this baseball game with Barack Obama throwing out the ceremonial first pitch in order to reveal the date on which the Antichrist will be defeated on the Temple Mount exactly 19 years later, because God uses pitchers on the pitching mound as symbolism for the Antichrist on the Temple Mount, hence the 1919 Chicago Black Sox. All right. This game in 2005 on October 12th was exactly 1,091 months, which hints at 9/11, and also hints at the 1919 Chicago Black Sox World Series, after the first commissioner of baseball was given power by the team owners. He was given unchecked power over every person in baseball in a moment of crisis. And this is symbolism for the unchecked power the Antichrist will be given over every American in a moment of crisis. This was on November 12th, 1920, in response to the 1919 cheating scandal, when the Black Sox or the White Sox threw the World Series for sports betting profits. Okay, so the first commissioner of baseball, in other words, is Antichrist symbolism. That's why he came to power exactly 1,091 months before the Obama Black Sox, or rather White Sox playoff game, and 1,091 months hints at 9/11. It is 2 1s and a 9, and God uses this pattern frequently in his signs for symbolism for the big warning of judgment on 9/11 in 2001. All right. Now, the first commissioner of baseball became the first commissioner on November 12th, 1920, exactly 666 days after the 18th Amendment was ratified, which was about prohibition and the restriction on buying and selling alcohol. The 18th Amendment hints, the number 18 hints at 6 plus 6 plus 6, and 666, the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. This is why exactly 666 days after the ratification of the 18th Amendment, was the day that the first commissioner of baseball was given unchecked power over every person in baseball. And that is more confirmation of all of the connections, but also that the first commissioner of baseball is symbolic of the Antichrist. Now, the reason why the 18th Amendment is extremely relevant is that it prohibited the buying and selling of alcohol. In Bible prophecy, it says that people will be restricted from buying and selling unless they take the mark of the Antichrist. Okay? And, okay, so now I'll just draw it out for you again here. From the ratification of the 18th Amendment, 666 days to the first commissioner of baseball coming to power, which is in turn exactly 1,091 months to the Obama first pitch Chicago baseball game, playoff game, which is in turn 19 years to the second coming and the defeat of the Antichrist on the Temple Mount. That baseball game is also, again, exactly 190 months, which hints at 19 and the 1919 Chicago Black Sox, to the Field of Dreams game, which is in turn 84 days to the 84 million workers mandate. All right, now this trail of signs that I am explaining here that begins with the 1919 Chicago Black Sox scandal and the rise to power of the first commissioner of baseball as a result. All of these connections here involving hints at the number 1919, the 1919 Chicago Black Sox. This, for example, 1,091 months, followed by exactly 19 years, and also exactly 190 months. All of this is what makes this connection right here astounding and profound confirmation that this will be the day that James Earl Jones will die. This connection is 919 days, which also hints at the 1919 Chicago Black Sox. Again, James Earl Jones starred in the movie Field of Dreams, which is about the 1919 Chicago Black Sox. In fact, the 1919 Chicago Black Sox in the movie are standing behind him as he is delivering his famous monologue speech in the movie about how America could be great again, which is what God is pointing to ultimately. He is pointing to this in order to warn America that it needs to repent or else it will be destroyed in his judgment. Okay, so that's why the 919 days connects to this Field of Dreams game. And by the way, player 99, Aaron Judge for the New York Yankees, was a major part of this sign. Now, I forget the details. I can't remember everything. I made a video about all of this in 2021, and I will post it again, I think. But anyway, the point is that God was using Aaron Judge in his signs because the number 9 in his signs symbolizes judgment. That's why Aaron Judge wears number 99. But also, this lines up, and for this purpose, to the first commissioner of baseball, whose name was Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis. He was a famous judge. He was made the first commissioner of baseball. His name includes the name Mountain. Strange name for parents to name someone, but that is his name, Kennesaw Mountain Landis. And mountain is a high place. And the name Bama in Hebrew means high place. And that's also the reason for this. Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis died in 1944, which also hints at the 44th president. And that also, by the way, confirms this 44 days connection here, because it is predicted that 44 days after James Earl Jones will die will be the day of a solar flare that will hit Earth and knock out America's power grid, which will be part of the crisis surrounding the rise of the Antichrist. This, in his God's signs, is being described with a metaphor of a lion's roar, which is explained in other videos. And that's why James Earl Jones was the voice of the Lion King in the movie The Lion King. Also, it is predicted on the day that James Earl Jones will die, the historic barge that has been stuck on the rocks of the Niagara River since Spanish flu, which was in 1918 and 1919, will crash over Niagara Falls. And that's also relevant too, because, well, it hints back to what we're talking about here with the 1919 Chicago Black Sox. But 1918 is also relevant because, although many people don't know this, the first World Series that was thrown for sports betting profits was actually the 1918 World Series. The world caught on to it in 1919, but actually the 1918 World Series was the first World Series to have been thrown, and that World Series was thrown by the other Chicago team, the Chicago Cubs, which is more confirmation symbolically in God's signs that Chicago is the corruptest city in America, which is the reason why the corrupt Antichrist president is from Chicago. But anyway, so that's also going to it's predicted to happen on the same day. And I think that's worth pointing out in this video too, because the prediction of the death of a 93-year-old man, arguably, although I think it is, if you've got the precise date and you've got, well, I should say, all of these connections here prove beyond a doubt that this is a prediction from God. You'd have to be completely irrational and spiritually a hater of God to not recognize that. But that is a lot, it is a spiritual thing to be able to see things. And so many people won't be able to see it, and they'll just say, oh, well, he was 93, so no big deal. But if you hear the explanation in his video, of course, you would realize that that's completely irrational. However, to be able to predict the day that James Earl Jones will die and the day that the barge will crash over Niagara Falls, which has been stuck on the falls, on the river for over 100 years. Well, of course, that proves everything as well, that it isn't luck that I'm predicting the death of James Earl Jones on this date. Anyway, Niagara Falls is known for the production of hydroelectricity, and it'll be explained in other videos, but that's also why it connects to the day that the power grid will go out due to a solar flare, lion's roar on the surface of the sun. I think we are done with this diagram here. This is truly, truly profound. I'm going to cut this out and make it a clip in a separate video, a shorter video, just because it is so important. One other thing too, the 1918 World Series that was thrown by the Chicago Cubs was played against the Boston Red Sox. Okay, and so these are the three teams that had these absurdly long droughts of not winning a World Series. The three teams, if anyone knows baseball, they know what I'm talking about, are the Chicago Cubs, Boston Red Sox, and Chicago White Sox. All three of these teams won the World Series during the time that Barack Obama was in Washington, D.C. in power. either as the senator from Illinois or the president. There's a reason for that, is because the curse of the Antichrist symbolism here is parallel with these sports curses. But the reason for these sports curses is because these are the teams that were involved in throwing the World Series for sports betting profits. And so anyway, those three teams all include colors, because you have the White Sox, Red Sox, and the Chicago Cubs' nickname is the Blue Bears. So you have red, white, and blue, which is symbolic of America, which is hinting at the curse of the Antichrist on America. Another quick thing that I'll add here too, because I don't know when I'll ever get a chance to get this information out into the world again. It's probably in another video, an older video, I'm sure. But anyway, the 1918 World Series was won. The last game of the series was on 9/11 in 1918. And that was exactly 1,260 years, or sorry, months. 1,260 months after 9/11 in 1813. Okay, now why is that relevant? Well, first of all, 7 times in Bible prophecy, the period of the Antichrist and the end times is symbolized by a period of time of 1,260 days. And again, we have the Chicago White Sox here and the Chicago Cubs, and the Chicago Cubs in this case, throwing the World Series exactly 1,260 months after 9/11 in 1813. Okay, the reason why the Boston Red Sox were in this World Series in 1918, by the way, incidentally, and not a coincidence, designed by God, in other words, is that 1918 is the year of Spanish flu. The curse of these baseball teams line up with that because the CVD disease is a curse from God designed to bring about the Antichrist, and the mark of the Antichrist, which is the CVD disease thing that is put inside of people. Okay, so 1,260 months back exactly to 9/11 in 1813, and that was the day. Oh, and Boston is symbolism for America, and so that's, and especially the Boston Red Sox in God's signs. The Boston Red Sox and the New England Patriots, because of the spiritual founding of America being in New England. All right, so we go back to 9/11 in 1813, and that was the day that the British landed at Washington's Mount Vernon estate. The Mount Vernon estate and George Washington are very important in God's signs in general, as explained in other videos. After the British landed, they proceeded to burn down the White House and the Capitol building. And George Washington's portrait was miraculously saved by the president's wife. So anyway, this was the only other time in history in which a foreign enemy attacked the nation's capital, other than on 9/11 in 2001. 9/11 in 2001 was exactly 188 years after 9/11 in 1813. And that is extremely profound because God frequently uses this number 188 because the 188th word in Strong's Hebrew Old Testament Concordance is the word woe, is the Hebrew word for woe, exclamation mark, which is used in the context of extreme judgment from God in the Bible, including in the book of Revelation, for example. In fact, there are 3 woes in the book of Revelation, judgments that will be coming upon the world. Okay, so you get that now? So the 1918 World Series connects to actually 9/11 extremely profoundly. The lion's roar, the solar flare on the surface of the sun, will knock out the nation's power grid and induce food rationing, a food shortage. And this food shortage will be used by the Antichrist and Antichrist system to enforce the mark of the Antichrist. Only those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist, the thing that you can't talk about, for 84 million workers, is the mark of the Antichrist, and one will not be able to buy or sell food unless they have taken the mark of the Antichrist. And this is how the restriction on buying and selling alcohol with the 18th Amendment in 1919, I believe it was January 16th if I recall, and that's why in this trail of signs, it connects to the coming solar flare on the sun that will knock out the nation's power grid, which will lead to the restriction of buying and selling food to those who have to only those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist. So you see here, this is so profound. We have this amazing connection from prohibition and all of this Antichrist Obama symbolism connecting to the coming food rationing and restriction on buying and selling food to only those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist. All right, one thing to add here, again, this connection was known in advance. It was known in 2021. It was known prior to November 4th, 2021, that God was pointing to this date because it was 84 days after the Field of Dreams prophetic game. But what was just discovered in March of 2024 is that the movie Field of Dreams cost $84 million to produce. That is amazing beyond words. That's why I had to interject here and add this update to this video here. All right, I'm now recording this after February 17th, and it is my great pleasure to update you on what has transpired here. But I just want to add a couple of things before I explain the prophetic signs that occurred on February 17th. And one thing is that the date February 17th is why we had predicted that the barge would crash over on this date. This wasn't the only instance in which God was pointing to the date February 17th regarding the barge. We had this in 2020 as well, and in 2023. So, and I believe also 2022, if I recall. Anyway, the reason for that is that the flood began in the book of Genesis on the 17th day of the second month. And Niagara Falls symbolizes the flood. It symbolizes the power of water moving over the earth. It engenders a perennial rainbow, the rainbow being God's sign, his covenant regarding judgment in the account of the flood. And the barge that is stuck on the rocks of the Niagara River was involved at the time of it getting stuck. It was involved in the most dramatic rescue in the history of Niagara Falls, in which a lifeline was shot from the power plant to rescue the two men stuck on the barge. This is all symbolism for Noah's Ark and the rescue of Noah and his family in the ark, a type of barge, if you will. Okay, so that's that. Now, in the account of the flood, God gave Noah a 7 days warning to load the ark before the flood would begin. This is why it is now predicted that James Earl Jones and the barge will crash over the falls. James Earl Jones will die, and the barge will crash over the falls 7 days, as in a 7 days warning, before the predicted solar flare that will knock out the nation's power grid. There's, of course, lots more reasoning to this than simply the 7 days warning. And one thing is that the date, March 25th, will be 37 days after this date. That hints at 3 sets of 7. That is a hint at the book of Joshua and the symbolic 3 sets of 7 that the Israelites enacted before the walls of security collapsed on the city of Jericho in God's judgment. All right, so they marched around once per day for 7 days, and then on the 7th day they marched around 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. It was a 3 sets of 7. There are also 3 sets of 7 in the account of the flood. In that 3 sets of 7 in the flood account is the 7 days warning that I just mentioned. Okay, so that's why 7 days, March 25th before April 1st. But also, the 37 days is 888 hours. Sorry. Yes, 888 hours. And that is profound too, because that hints at Jesus, because the name Jesus in Greek gematria, equals 888. Gematria, if you don't know, Roman, Greek, and Hebrew letters are also numbers, and as such, names and words can be converted into a numeric value, and God frequently uses this 888 symbolism in his prophetic signs to point to Jesus. And the rapture is symbolic of Jesus, the rescue in the account of the flood is symbolic of Jesus rescuing his faithful at the time of the coming judgment, which, as Peter said, this time will be symbolized by fire instead of water, which is why the solar flare, which is symbolic of fire. All right, so that's also a confirmation. So again, the way God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel, is it works on the principle of second and third witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required, but it is also an interconnected web. The full intended meaning of the prophetic signs cannot be properly understood without their connections and context with the other signs. Because through them, God is telling stories, through the connections, through the signs connecting to each other. Like, this diagram is a perfect example, with the first commissioner of baseball hinting at the Antichrist, and the Antichrist using rationed food, restricting buying and selling food, which is hinted at with the restriction on buying and selling alcohol. This is a great example, okay? And it's even identifying who that Antichrist is, Obama, because he threw out the first pitch. Okay, so you get the idea. And anyway, the point is that February 17th was a step in the trail of signs. All of the analysis for February 17th was 100% correct. If you are skeptical, when the prediction comes to pass, 37 days later, it will prove that. That, is the purpose of the prediction, is to prove that this is God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, and therefore, the important knowledge and stories that God is communicating through his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, is true. This is the purpose of the prediction that is from God. This prediction that James Earl Jones will die on March 25th is a prediction from God. And this is the purpose of the prediction, is to prove these things that I'm saying. All right, now I'm going to explain the amazing signs that occurred on February 17th. All right, this is an explanation for the amazing prophetic signs from the righteous Christian God of the Bible that occurred on February 17th, these signs that were expected in advance of February 17th, because it was known that God was pointing to February 17th, and this was known in advance of February 17th. And these signs related to, as was known ahead of time, James Earl Jones and the predicted death of James Earl Jones, and the historic barge that has been stuck on the rocks of the Niagara River, and its predicted crash finally after 100 years over Niagara Falls. All right, now this email was composed on February 18th, as we can see, and this was my analysis that I wrote regarding what had happened. I wrote to some friends here. All right, so it was expected that on February 17th, James Earl Jones would die and the barge would crash over Niagara Falls. The voice of the Lion King is symbolism for a solar flare, a lion's roar. God is using this metaphor of a lion's roar for the coming solar flare on the surface of the sun. That's explained in other videos. But that's why James Earl Jones, because he was the voice of the Lion King. On February 17th, a rare solar flare erupted. Okay, so we already knew, in fact, a couple of years ago, that James Earl Jones was symbolism for a lion's roar. That actually has been known since 2000 and at least early 2020. All right, because it's been known since 2019, the summer of 2019, that God is using James Earl Jones, and then I forget how long it took to figure out that he was this was hinting at this coming solar flare, lion's roar on the surface of the sun. But anyway, the point is that we already knew this a long time ago, and we knew about February 17th ahead of time. That's why it's astounding beyond words that on this date we received a solar flare sign. It's just amazing. On February 17th, a rare solar flare erupted, and that's what makes it a sign, because it's rare. I'll explain, but this is news. It was a news story, in other words. Okay, a rare solar flare erupted 200,000 kilometers high above the sun. Now, what made it exceptional? Let's see. I don't know. Let's see. Do I write it? Where do I write it? Well, I'll probably explain it later on in the email, but I'll just explain it now. What made it rare is that it occurred on the South Pole. Solar flares do not typically erupt on the South Pole. They erupt at the equator of the sun. And not only did it erupt on the South Pole, but it was exceptionally high, like extremely high. So this is unheard of. It was a news story because of this. It was 200,000 kilometers above the sun, and it was at the South Pole. So let's move on. This solar flare sign was exactly 188 weeks. This is a number God frequently uses in his signs, but it is important. It is a huge thing when he does use it, because it hints at the 188th word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, which is the word that means woe, ! Used in the context of extreme judgment from God. That is appropriate, this connection of exactly 188 weeks to this solar flare, because the solar flare is a sign that's pointing to the upcoming woe, which is the predicted eruption of the sun that will knock out the power grid on April 1st, 2024. Okay, so this solar flare sign, though, on February 17th, was exactly 188 weeks after this amazing prophetic sign, which was the first, and God uses firsts for his signs, the first ever detected super flare. This was a new term invented because of this discovery. The first ever detected super flare on a star located right in the neck of the constellation Leo, the lion, which because of this, the media dubbed this news story the lion's roar. The super flare was 20 times more powerful than any solar flare ever detected on our sun. That's why it was a super flare. And the 20 times also hints at the 200,000 kilometers for this rare super flare on February 17th, exactly 188 weeks later. Now, the date isn't the actual date of the super flare. This was the date that it was first reported. The published study from the university that discovered this. All right. But that was the day that the media called it the lion's roar. That was the headline. All right. So this is amazing. I mean, this is one of the main signs, actually, regarding the coming, eruption of the solar flare on the sun. And so it profoundly connects to this date that we knew in advance was a Lion King, Lion's Roar date. Okay, so it doesn't get any more amazing. All right, now, this February 17th date was also 4 + 4 days after the Noah flare. So there was a flare that was a news story as well. It was an X-class flare. But what made it a prophetic sign, this particular one, was that it emanated from sunspot 7595, if I recall. Now, I can't remember everything. But whatever the number was, and I think that is the number, but it, in Strong's Concordance, the 7,595th word or whatever number it was, is the word Noah. Okay? And again, February 17th, maybe I explained it earlier in another video maybe, but the date February 17th is Noah symbolism, because the flood in the account in Genesis began on the 17th day of the second month. That's why we have this amazing 4 + 4 days connection between these two solar flares, the Noah flare and this solar flare on February 17th. But why is 4 + 4 days relevant and important or significant? Because the 44th president is the Antichrist. But what confirms this, and this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel, it works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses, confirming a matter as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And so we need a second witness to confirm this 4 + 4 days connection. It's not enough to just have the 4 + 4 days and go, oh, cool, 44th president. No, it's not enough. We need a second witness. But God does this when it is his signs. And the solar flare on February 17th is 44 days before the predicted solar flare. This date, 4/1, April 1st. And this date was known before this 44 days connection was known. All right. So that's amazing. We have 4 + 4 days and then 44 days connecting all three of these solar flares. One of them is a predicted one in the future. Astounding. Now, regarding Noah symbolism, 7 days before this is March 25th, and that is the date that it is predicted that James Earl Jones will die and the barge will crash over Niagara Falls on the same day that Jones is predicted to die. The reason for the 7 days is because in the account of the flood, God gave Noah a 7 days warning before the flood waters came. And the barge is Noah's flood symbolism, because Niagara Falls is symbolic of the power of water moving over the earth, and it engenders a perennial rainbow, and which is God's sign regarding his covenant with man concerning judgment. And the barge was involved in the most dramatic rescue in the history of Niagara Falls at the time that it got stuck. And that's symbolic of the rescue of Noah and his family in the ark. Okay, so that's why the barge will crash on March 25th, predicted. This is the prediction, because it'll be 7 days before the predicted solar flare that will knock out the power. Furthermore, Niagara Falls is associated with electricity, the hydroelectric power plant there. And furthermore, that's how the men were rescued. The Coast Guard shot a lifeline from the top of the power plant in order to pull in the men trapped on the barge. Okay. And by the way, March 25th is 37 days after February 17th. That hints at 3 sets of 7. In the account of Noah's flood, there are 3 instances of 3 sets of 7. God uses 3 sets of 7 in context of his judgment. This comes also from the book of Joshua, when the Israelites enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7 before the walls of security of the ancient city of Jericho collapsed in God's judgment. They marched around once per day for 7 days, and then on the 7th day they marched 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. Okay, and so the reason why James Earl Jones will die 7 days ahead of time as well is that'll be part of this sign in conjunction with the barge crashing that will indicate a 7 days warning before the lion's roar on the surface of the sun. The solar flare on February 17th was exceptional for its height. The solar flare on February 17th was exactly 1,117 months after James Earl Jones was born. That is amazing, so amazing beyond words, because again, this was known ahead of time. February 17th was known ahead of time to be exactly 1,117 months after the birth of James Earl Jones. But, and also the sun being alluded to with this connection because it's high above the earth, symbolically. So, Bama in Hebrew means high place. That's why God uses this number to point to the Antichrist, to identify him. All right? Okay, and that's because the name Barack Obama means lightning from heaven. Heaven is a high place is a metaphor in the Bible for heaven. Lucifer, it is said, fell from the high place. And Jesus said in Luke 10:18 that he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. And so Barack Obama means lightning from heaven. Barak means lightning, Bama means high place or heaven, and O in the language Jesus would have spoken, Aramaic, means from. And so Barack Obama means lightning from heaven. And this is why God uses 1,117 in his signs for this purpose, because either Jesus didn't know what he was saying when he said this, or he knew that there would be a famous president named Barack Obama and said this anyway, knowing that it would confuse us, or he was revealing the identity of the Antichrist. Obviously, the latter option is the only one that makes any sense. All right, so there you have the full explanation for why this is so amazing, because the solar flare that occurred on February 17th, as I just mentioned, was known, it was a story because of its height. And that's why we have this 1,117 months exact connection to February 17th. All right, the rare solar flare on the south pole of the sun on February 17th was 220.55% of a year after the solar flare after the solar eclipse, I should say, over the south pole that pointed to Shackleton's Endurance ship. And the date of the eclipse was December 4th, 2021. So there are actually, I can't recall for you the details of the other eclipse over Antarctica that also points to Shackleton's Endurance ship. But the Endurance ship is a coincidence because Shackleton and his crew ended up going on the most epic test of endurance in all of history. And it just so happens that their ship was named Endurance, and this is because it hints at the endurance of the saints. Now, the reason why 220.55% is relevant is because 220 symbolizes Jesus, because the 220th word, well, first of all, 220 is 2 times 110. This is why on 9/11 it was 2 times 110 stories that collapsed, because Jesus in his first coming officially arrived on the date 110, which hints at 110. Therefore, the second coming is symbolized by 2 times 110. That's why on 9/11 the 2 towers that were 110 stories. But also, the 220th word in Strong's Greek Concordance is the word for rooster, which symbolizes Peter in Christianity. And Peter's name means rock. It is the Greek word for rock, and in the Bible, rock symbolizes Jesus. And Jesus is symbolized by this lion's roar that's coming on the surface of the sun. Now, 55, because this also hints at James Earl Jones, who was born near Memphis, and lots of other signs, Graceland, etc., and the I-55 highway. Okay, so let's leave it there. Explained in other videos. Okay, so now the eclipse in turn was exactly 9 weeks before the Endurance 22 was launched, and exactly 13 weeks before Endurance 22 discovered the Endurance ship. That's a great story, but not for this video. 9 times 13 equals 117, the date of the resurrection of Christ. Okay, so I'm just going on the details here, but you get the idea. So the South Pole solar flare was discovered by an Argentine astronomer. Okay, this one on February 17th I'm talking about. Okay, it was discovered by this Argentine astronomer. I think he was an amateur astronomer. I'm not sure about that though. Probably not, because it's the sun, right? I don't know though. But the point is that the Antichrist, the first of the two Antichrists, Pope Francis, is from Argentina. The solar flare was 3 days after the Kansas City shooting, after the Super Bowl, the victory parade, which was 3 days after the Super Bowl, which pointed to Francis. Okay, the Super Bowl was all about the number 13, as explained in the Swift Super Bowl video. All right, and it was all about Francis. That's why San Francisco was in the Super Bowl. And these 3 days connecting with the number 13, that's the day that Pope Francis was elected. All right, and the Super Bowl was about how Kansas City won by 3 points, 3 seconds remaining in the game. The quarterback passed for 333 yards, etc. In the overtime, the third period, all right, etc. So I don't know. The article needs to be read to appreciate the solar flare and how it was rare. So I'm writing to my friends there, but I think you got the idea. It was rare because it was from the South Pole, and it was 200,000 kilometers above the sun. Anyway, there you have it. There you have also the explanation for how February 17th was an important step in the trail of signs that is leading to the predicted date that James Earl Jones will die and the historic barge will crash over Niagara Falls on March 25th, which will be a prophetic 7 days warning before the predicted solar flare on the sun, a lion's roar, that will knock out the North American power grid. In God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, the most important number is the number 9, as from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment. God uses the number 90 to symbolize the number 9, and God uses 90 weeks connections for this purpose. Joe Biden was born exactly 90 weeks before the famous British actor Ian McDermott was born. Joe Biden was born in 1942 and McDermott was born in 1944. In Bible prophecy, the number 42 is symbolism for the Antichrist, and the Antichrist is the 44th president. McDermott played Emperor Palpatine in the Star Wars movies. At the climax of the end of the prequel trilogy in the movie Revenge of the Sith, a movie that is about the rise of Darth Vader, which is Antichrist symbolism, and James Earl Jones was the voice of Darth Vader. Emperor Palpatine delivers his famous speech about the threat the Republic faces from within. A threat that requires that he take temporary, unchecked power in order to resolve the crisis and threat to democracy. This exact 90 weeks connection between the birth of Joe Biden and Ian McDermott is designed by God to confirm the parallel between Joe Biden's speech from hell and Emperor Palpatine's speech. Biden and his team appropriately named the speech Soul of the Nation. There is a spiritual war going on for the soul of the nation and the souls within the nation. The soon coming crisis will be the pretext for the Antichrist taking unchecked power. In other words, the handwriting is on the wall for America. God's judgment destruction of America will now commence.
I love democracy.
The most extraordinary experiment of self-government the world has ever known.
I love democracy.
These two documents and the ideas they embody, equality and democracy, are the rock upon which this nation is built.
I love the Republic.
They're how we became the greatest nation on earth.
The Republic is not what it once was.
Equality and democracy are under assault. We do ourselves no favor to pretend otherwise.
The Republic is not what it once was. A strong Chancellor.
So tonight, I've come to this place where it all began to speak as plainly as I can to the nation about the threats we face.
And the Jedi rebellion has been foiled.
What's happened?
The Chancellor's been elaborating on a plot by the Jedi.
About the power we have in our own hands to meet these threats.
But I assure you, my resolve has never been stronger.
A strong Chancellor.
A mission I believe in with my whole soul.
It is with great reluctance that I have agreed to this calling.
We must be honest with each other and with ourselves. Too much of what's happening in our country today is not normal.
The Republic is not what it once was.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. And that is a threat to this country.
And the Jedi rebellion has been foiled.
What's happened?
The Chancellor's been elaborating on a plot by the Jedi.
But I'm an American president. My duty to level with you, to tell the truth, no matter how difficult, no matter how painful.
It is with great reluctance that I have agreed to this calling. The power you give me, I will lay down when this crisis has abated.
Trump and the extreme MAGA Republicans quote a clear and present danger to our democracy. But while the threat to American democracy is real, I want to say as clearly as we can, we are not powerless in the face of these threats. We are not bystanders in this ongoing attack on democracy. It's within our power, it's in our hands, yours and mine, to stop the assault on American democracy.
And the remaining Jedi will be hunted down and defeated.
In order to ensure the security and continuing stability,
The Republic will be reorganized into the first galactic empire for a safe and secure society.
The Republic is not what it once was. The Republic is not what it once was. The Republic is not what it once was.
in order to ensure the security and continuing stability,
The Republic will be reorganized into the first galactic empire for a safe and secure society.
So This is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.
It's within our power. It's in our hands, yours and mine.
One of the purposes for this prediction is to establish that the main conclusions being stated in this video are fact. It is a serious warning for those that disagree with the things being stated in this video. And to not appreciate this is to miss entirely the point of this prediction that is from God, and it is to miss the point of this video and video channel. This is how prophecy works. This is how God proves things. This is why 1/3 of the Bible is prophecy, in order to prove that it is the Word of God. Jesus said to those that doubted him, if they didn't believe what he had said, then they should believe the works. They should believe the healings and miracles that Jesus did. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the BitChute.com or the Odyssey.com channel. And do it now in case you aren't able to later.